The first time Olivia burned me with a hot curling iron, I was just 12. The pain was unbearable, but it wasn't the burn that hurt the most. It was my mother's cold, indifferent voice telling me to clean it up before your father gets home. No concern, no apology, just a dismissal. I thought it was the worst moment of my life, but it was only the beginning. Every scar, every bruise just pushed me further into the shadows. And that's where the real fire began to burn, not on my skin but inside me, ready to ignite everything. I was 12 when it happened, the first time Olivia burned me with the hot curling iron. I can still feel the searing heat on my skin, a painful memory that refuses to fade. I screamed as loud as I could, but the sound seemed to dissipate into the silence of the house. My back burned, but what cut deeper was the indifference I saw in my mother's eyes. She didn't rush to my side, didn't ask if I was okay. She just looked at me coldly, as if my pain didn't matter. "Clean it up before your father gets home," she said flatly, almost as if it were an afterthought. And that was it. No apology, no sympathy, no care, just a cold order. I remember the smell of my own skin burning, the sting of the iron carving through me, but what lingered far longer than that was the chill in the air, the absence of any warmth, the absence of love, concern, or even a shred of empathy from the one person who should have been there to protect me. I didn't even cry. I didn't know how to anymore. When you've been hurt so many times, you learn to just take it, to shut it out. And I was shutting down. It was easier that way. After all, the truth was that no one ever cared enough to listen. They just assumed I deserved it. That night, as I clutched the burn on my back, trying to hold back my tears, I heard the sound of Olivia laughing from the other room. I could hear her mocking me, probably making jokes with Mom about how easily I broke. She never even looked at me, never even acknowledged the pain she had caused. "She always overreacts," I overheard my mother say once, her voice as cold as the iron Olivia had just pressed against my skin. "She's so dramatic. Let her cry it out." I had hoped that maybe, just once, my mother would see through the lies, that maybe, just once, she would stand up for me, defend me, but she never did. Every time, I was the one at fault. Every single time, Olivia was justified. And if I ever tried to speak up, I was told I was imagining things, overreacting, or simply provoking her. And that's when it hit me. I had no place in this family. Not really. I was just the punching bag, the one who was there to take the blows, both physical and emotional, and never complain. I wasn't loved the way Olivia was. I wasn't the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. That night, I stayed in my room, staring at the ceiling, feeling the burn on my back throb. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stayed there, numb. And in that numbness, a quiet rage started to form. A rage that I didn't know how to express yet. Why had Mum always been so dismissive? Why had she never once stepped in when Olivia hurt me? Why had Olivia been allowed to walk away unscathed every single time? The answer was simple. I was nothing to them. Just the unwanted daughter who had no place in their perfect little world. But something inside me was beginning to shift. Maybe it was the burn on my skin, or maybe it was the words my mother had said. But I knew then that I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't just let them treat me like this. I wasn't going to keep being their victim. In the days that followed, I kept to myself, staying as far away from Olivia as I could. I started to realize that I wasn't weak, not really. The rage inside me kept building, slowly, quietly. I didn't have to scream or shout to make myself heard. All I had to do was be patient. Time would come and I would get my chance. But I needed to figure out how. Olivia always acted like she had the upper hand, like she could get away with anything. It wasn't just the burn on my back. It was the way she looked at me, like I was nothing. She didn't care about me. She never had. She only cared about her image, her status as the perfect daughter. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it anymore. I wasn't going to let her win. In the silence of that house, as the burn slowly healed, something inside me began to awaken. The rage turned to resolve. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let Olivia and Mom keep getting away with treating me like this. I was going to fight back in my own way. I wasn't going to let them decide my worth anymore. The night I left, I felt a deep coldness that I hadn't noticed before. It was the kind of cold that gnawed at your bones, made you question everything you'd known about the world. I'd spent years in that house, years in that family, but that night I realised something. This wasn't just about Olivia or my mother. It was about a system, a toxic dynamic that had been built over the years, one that constantly reinforced my place as the outsider, the one who didn't belong. Olivia and Mum continued on, unfazed, as if nothing had changed. They kept up their perfect facade, their carefully curated life where everything was right in the world. Mum smiled her perfect smile. Olivia strutted around, always the golden child, always the one everyone adored. But that was just a mask. It was all fake. I had seen enough to know the truth, and yet there I was, pushed aside, invisible, alone. They were happy in their little world, and I was just an afterthought, someone to be ignored, to be cast aside, like an object that had no purpose. I was no longer angry. I was just empty. The emptiness was suffocating. The numbness spread through me like a disease. I didn't belong to them, never had, and I wasn't going back. I could leave, and they wouldn't even care. I could walk out the door, never look back, and they wouldn't notice the void I'd left behind. It didn't matter to them. I was just another obstacle they'd gotten rid of. I drove away that night, without a destination in mind. I didn't need one. I just needed to get away from the house, from the memories, from the people who had never really seen me. I was free, but the freedom felt more like a prison. Because what was freedom if you didn't have anyone who cared? What was freedom if you were running away from your own blood? The next few days were a blur. I stayed in cheap motels, moving from one to the next, never staying in one place too long. I didn't want to stay anywhere long enough to become familiar. I didn't want to get comfortable. Comfort was dangerous. Comfort meant vulnerability. Comfort meant I could be hurt again. But as the days passed, something started to shift inside me. The numbness began to wear off, and in its place, something darker started to emerge. A quiet, simmering anger, a hunger for justice. For so long I had lived in the shadows of Olivia and my mother, but now I saw clearly everything they had done to me was a choice, and I was done being the victim. One night I found myself sitting in a diner, watching the rain fall outside. The soft patter of raindrops against the window felt like the world was listening to me. I had never realized how much noise my life had been until the silence hit me, the loud arguments, the sharp words, the screams, the silence after. It was always so loud, so overwhelming. But now, in the quiet of the diner, I felt something. Resolve. I thought back to my childhood, to the moments I had buried deep down, the memories I had tried to forget. And there it was, the moment when I first realized that I wasn't loved, that I was just a burden to them. I remembered when I was just 8 years old, I had gotten into a fight with Olivia, something stupid, over a toy or some small disagreement. She had pushed me and I had fallen, scraping my knee on the rough pavement. I had cried out, not from the pain, but from the humiliation of it all. But when I went to Mum for comfort, she didn't come. She didn't ask if I was okay, didn't check to see if I was hurt. Instead, she had looked at me and then at Olivia, shaking her head. "You know, Emma," she had said coldly, "maybe if you weren't so difficult, you wouldn't get hurt. Olivia didn't mean it." Even then, I had known the truth. Olivia didn't care about me. She never had. But what hurt more was that Mom had always protected her no matter what. Olivia could do no wrong in her eyes, while I was the one who was always wrong, always the one who deserved the consequences. It didn't matter how many times I tried to speak up, to get her to listen. She was too busy protecting Olivia to notice me. That memory stuck with me, even more than the others. It was the moment I realized that I didn't matter to them. I was just a shadow, a part of the background they ignored. I wasn't their daughter, their sister. I was a nobody in their eyes, and they couldn't be bothered to care. And that's when I knew for sure I was done. Done with being their victim. Done with trying to fit into a family that didn't want me. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval. I had to do this on my own. I had to make them see me, make them regret every single thing they had done to me. So I made a vow to never go back, to never be their punching bag again. I would make them realize the truth, and I would make them pay for what they had done. The silence around me was no longer deafening. It was my strength. I drove for hours, my mind a blur of chaotic thoughts, before I finally found myself in front of Rachel's apartment. It was the first place that felt remotely safe, the one place that had always been a refuge for me. I had called her as soon as I left the house, not saying much, just that I needed to see her. And without hesitation, she had told me to come over. Rachel had always been there for me, no questions asked. When she opened the door, I was already on the verge of breaking down, though I didn't want her to see it. I hid my pain behind a mask of forced composure, the same way I always did when I was around anyone else. But Rachel knew me better than anyone. The moment she saw me, she pulled me into her arms, without a single word, holding me as if she knew exactly how broken I was. "Emma, what happened?" she finally whispered, her voice gentle but full of concern. I didn't answer at first. The words were lodged in my throat, and I wasn't sure I was ready to say them. But Rachel wasn't going to let it slide. She knew me too well. I don't even know how to explain it anymore, I said, my voice trembling. It's not just this, Rachel. It's everything. It's been like this for years. Rachel led me to the couch, sitting beside me as I told her everything. I spoke slowly at first, recounting the burn from the curling iron, the way my mother had stood there, cold and detached, as if I wasn't even worth her concern, how Olivia had laughed it off as if I were nothing but a nuisance. I talked about how over the years, every time I had been hurt, every time I tried to speak up, it was always the same. They either ignored me or told me I deserved it. Rachel listened intently, never interrupting. She didn't judge, she didn't offer pity, she just listened, as if she understood every single word, every single pain I was feeling. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. After I finished, there was a heavy silence between us. Rachel didn't say anything at first, just sat there with me, processing everything. But then she broke the silence. "Emma, you know I've seen the way they treat you," she said quietly. "I've seen it all along, but I never knew how bad it really was. I had no idea it went this deep." That hit me like a ton of bricks. Rachel had always known there was something wrong, but she hadn't known the full extent of it. I had always kept the worst of it hidden, not wanting to burden her, not wanting anyone to think I was weak. "But I'm here now," Rachel continued, her voice full of determination. "And I'm not going anywhere. We can figure this out. We can make sure they never hurt you again." Her words gave me a sense of relief, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't have to carry this alone anymore. Rachel was there, standing by me, even when the people who were supposed to love me had failed me time and time again. For the next few days, we sat together, going through everything. I told Rachel about the times Olivia had mocked me, the moments my mother had sided with her, even when Olivia had hurt me. It felt like an endless list of betrayal, and each time I spoke, it was as if a weight lifted from my chest. I was finally allowing myself to feel the pain, to acknowledge the truth of what had happened. And in doing so, I felt a sense of release. I wasn't just a victim anymore, I was reclaiming my voice. Rachel, being the resourceful person she was, started helping me gather evidence. We began scouring old texts, old voicemail messages. I showed her the cruel messages my mother had sent me over the years, messages that were full of disdain, telling me I was a burden, a problem. She even found the voicemail where my mum laughed at me, saying I bruised like a peach, as if I were just some fragile thing to be ignored. But there was more. Rachel uncovered pictures, photos I had taken over the years, photos of bruises, of cuts, of burns that I had suffered. Some of them were from years ago, some more recent. But they all told the same story. I had been hurt, repeatedly, by the people who were supposed to love and protect me. "Emma, we need to keep this. We need to keep all of this," Rachel said, her voice filled with resolve. "This isn't just about proving your pain. This is about showing them the truth, and we're going to make sure it doesn't stay hidden anymore." As I looked at the pile of evidence, the weight of it all settled in. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something bigger. Maybe, for the first time, I could fight back. I wasn't alone, I had Rachel, and together we were going to make sure that no one would ever ignore me again. The days after that were filled with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just sitting in silence anymore, waiting for the next blow. I was taking action. Rachel and I had started working on a plan, one that wasn't about shouting or fighting, but about strategy. I needed to outsmart them, to make them regret ever thinking they could walk all over me. I wasn't just going to survive this family, I was going to dismantle it from the inside out. I started by meeting with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Claire, who came highly recommended. I didn't trust many people anymore, but something about her calm demeanour made me believe she could help me. We sat down in a small conference room and I explained everything to her. The years of abuse, the neglect, the mental and emotional scars that had been left on me. She listened carefully, taking notes, her face a mask of professionalism. "You have a case," she said after a while, her voice low but steady. "You've suffered. There's evidence, but it's going to take time, and it's not going to be easy. We're going to need a lot more than just your word. We need proof." That's where Rachel came in. She was the one who sifted through old text messages, emails, voicemails, anything that could show how my mother and Olivia had manipulated me over the years. The pieces of evidence we found were damning. There were messages from my mother that were cold and cruel, accusing me of being a burden. There were photos of bruises and burns that I had kept hidden. Some from incidents that were years old, others fresh from more recent fights. But as we started compiling everything, I realised something more, something I hadn't expected. My mother hadn't just been neglectful. She hadn't just been indifferent to my pain. She had used her power, her influence, to manipulate and control me, to make sure I was always the one who was in the wrong. I remember the moment it hit me. Rachel and I were going through some old documents that I had saved over the years, school records, medical bills, and other random pieces of paperwork. As I scanned through them, I stumbled upon a letter from a lawyer. It was an old letter, one I had never noticed before. It was dated 5 years ago, right after Olivia had graduated from college. The letter was about a legal battle. My mother had used her influence to pull strings and make sure Olivia landed a job at a prestigious firm, one that she didn't deserve. The letter was clear. My mother had used her connections to get Olivia hired, not based on merit, but because of who she was. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I had never known about this. My mother had used her power not just to protect Olivia, but to keep me in my place. Every time Olivia got ahead, it was because my mother had made sure of it. I had been left behind, constantly told that I wasn't good enough, while Olivia, the golden child, was handed everything on a silver platter. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just a victim of Olivia's cruelty. I was a victim of my mother's manipulation. She had used me as a pawn in her game of control. And Olivia, for all her cruelty, had been the tool my mother used to break me down. I had been so focused on Olivia, on the burns and bruises, that I had never seen the larger picture. My mother had orchestrated it all. That knowledge made something inside me snap. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't just about getting back at Olivia for what she had done to me. It was about breaking free from my mother's control, about shattering the hold she had on my life for so long. I couldn't just sit by anymore. I couldn't keep letting them manipulate me, letting them make me feel small and insignificant. I had to fight back. But this time, it wasn't going to be with anger or violence. It was going to be with strategy, with intellect. I was going to take them down piece by piece until they had nothing left. Claire, the lawyer, told me that we needed to be careful. It would take time to gather everything we needed. There was no way to know how Olivia and my mother would react when they found out I was fighting back. But I didn't care. I was done playing their game. I was done being the victim. I spent the next few weeks focused on building my case, working with Claire, and using Rachel's help to uncover more of the secrets they had kept hidden. With each new discovery, my resolve grew stronger. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to make sure that they never, ever hurt me again. And when the time came, I would make them pay for every single thing they had done to me. This was no longer about surviving. It was about taking back my power. As the days turned into weeks, Emma's resolve only grew stronger. The pain she had buried for so long was now fueling a fire inside her that she couldn't extinguish. The burn on her back had faded, but the scars, both physical and emotional, were just starting to heal, just enough to give her clarity. She had a mission now. It wasn't just about the revenge anymore. It was about making sure Olivia and her mother never had the chance to hurt anyone the way they had hurt her. Emma didn't need brute force to bring them down. She didn't need to shout or cry or beg. What she needed was something far more powerful, the truth. She had already begun gathering evidence with Rachel's help, text messages, voicemails, photos. But now, Emma needed to hit them where it would hurt the most, their carefully crafted reputations. Olivia, for all her faults, had always been careful about the image she projected. She had worked hard to climb the social ladder, to secure her position in the high-powered PR firm she worked for. She wasn't just good at her job, she was great at playing the part of the perfect, untouchable professional. Emma had seen this side of Olivia up close, and it made her sick. Olivia had always thought she was above everyone else, above Emma, above the rules, above consequences. But Emma knew that beneath that flawless exterior was a woman who was living a lie. Emma's plan was simple. She would expose that lie. It took weeks of planning and careful observation, but Emma knew she had to be patient. She knew that Olivia, in her arrogance, would never see the storm coming. She was too busy basking in the life she had built, too wrapped up in her own self-importance. She never considered for a second that someone, least of all Emma, would be capable of pulling the rug out from under her. Olivia was far too complacent, far too confident in her position. She thought that everything she had, her job, her reputation, was untouchable. What she didn't realize was that Emma was building a case, quietly and methodically. Emma had learned everything she needed to know about Olivia's connections, her clients, the things she had done to get ahead, and now Emma had the power to bring it all down. One night, as she sat in front of her laptop, Emma uncovered something that made her blood run cold. She had always suspected it, but now she had the proof. Olivia's rise to the top hadn't been as clean as she had led everyone to believe. She had used questionable tactics, manipulating her way into the good graces of powerful people, forging relationships based on deceit and blackmail, and doing whatever it took to secure her place in the world. But there was more, something even more damning. Emma had discovered that Olivia's job at the prestigious PR firm wasn't as legitimate as it seemed. Olivia had leveraged her connections that her mother had cultivated over the years, to ensure that she would land the job. And Emma knew that if she exposed this, Olivia's carefully crafted image would crumble. She would lose everything. Emma wasn't satisfied with just knowing the truth. She wanted to make sure that everyone else did too. It was time for Olivia's public persona to be shattered. Emma had already started working on a plan to get the information into the right hands. She wasn't just going to expose Olivia's secrets. She was going to make sure it was done in a way that would cause the most damage. She knew just how to use her words, her actions, to turn the tide, and soon Olivia would see just how far Emma was willing to go to take her down. As the days passed, Emma's anger grew. It wasn't just about Olivia anymore. It was about everything. It was about the years of being overlooked, the years of being dismissed, the years of being nothing more than a shadow in the background. It was about proving to herself that she wasn't weak, that she wasn't some helpless victim who had to rely on others for validation. Emma wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming a force to be reckoned with, and she was about to make sure that Olivia and her mother would never forget that. The night she finalized the plan, Emma felt a rush of adrenaline. She was ready. It was time. Olivia, oblivious to everything that was about to unfold, went about her daily routine, confident in her position, unaware of the storm Emma was about to bring. Emma knew this was her moment. She had worked hard, waited patiently, and now it was time to unleash the truth. Olivia thought she was untouchable, but Emma was about to show her just how wrong she was. Emma had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, each day a step closer to unravelling Olivia's life, carefully plotting her revenge. She wasn't going to rush it. Patience had always been her strength. What Olivia and her mother hadn't realised was that Emma had been quietly gathering evidence, meticulously building a case, and sending small but crucial pieces of information to those who could bring Olivia down. One afternoon, as Emma sat in her dimly lit apartment, her eyes scanned the files she had compiled. Rachel had been an invaluable ally, sifting through endless paperwork, messages and photos, helping to piece together a puzzle that had taken years to assemble. Emma was no longer just documenting Olivia's mistakes. She was orchestrating her fall from grace. It wasn't enough for Emma to simply expose Olivia's secrets. She needed to hit her where it would hurt the most, her job. The one thing Olivia valued above all else was her professional reputation. She prided herself on being the perfect, untouchable employee, the star of her PR firm. But Emma knew the truth. Olivia had built her career on lies, connections, and manipulation. Her rise to the top hadn't been earned. It had been carefully curated by her mother's influence. Emma wasn't interested in playing by Olivia's rules. She was going to rewrite the script, and Olivia wouldn't even see it coming. She started by carefully crafting a series of anonymous tips. Emma made sure they were perfectly timed, sending them to the right people in Olivia's firm. She knew how these things worked, how a single email, a whisper in the right ear, could destroy someone's career. The tips contained evidence of Olivia's questionable practices, her manipulation of clients, and the truth behind her promotion to the PR firm's upper echelons. Each piece of evidence was a small crack in the foundation of Olivia's perfect world. At first, Olivia didn't notice. She was too busy basking in the glow of her success, too confident that no one could touch her. But Emma was relentless. She kept feeding the fire, one small piece of evidence at a time. Olivia's world, which had always felt so secure, began to shift. She started to notice the whispers in the office, the sideways glances. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something was off. She was used to being in control, used to being admired, and yet now there was an unease that had crept into her life. The first sign of trouble came one afternoon when Olivia received an email from her boss. The subject line was simple: internal review. Olivia's stomach sank as she opened the email, her heart racing. The message was vague, but the tone was cold, and the implications were clear. There were concerns about her behaviour and the way she handled certain clients. Olivia dismissed it at first, thinking it was just a routine check, but the nagging feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. That evening, she found herself pacing around her apartment, replaying the events of the past few weeks in her mind. The mysterious emails, the subtle comments from co-workers, the quiet disapproval that had started to follow her everywhere. Olivia had always prided herself on being one step ahead, But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt vulnerable. She didn't know who was behind this sudden shift, but she could feel the walls closing in. The next day, things took a darker turn. Olivia's boss, a powerful man who had always been her biggest ally, called her into his office. He didn't mince words. "Olivia, we need to talk," he began, his voice low and serious. "There have been some allegations regarding your conduct. I'm afraid we have no choice but to initiate an internal investigation." Olivia's blood ran cold. She tried to defend herself, to explain that it was all just a misunderstanding, but the words wouldn't come. She had always been able to talk her way out of any situation, but this time she couldn't find the right words. Her boss's expression remained unreadable, and she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "I don't know what's going on," Olivia said, her voice shaky. "I've worked hard to get here. I don't deserve this." Her boss didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced at his computer screen where Emma's anonymous tips had been gathered. Photos, screenshots, and records of conversations, all evidence that pointed to Olivia's manipulation and deceit. Olivia's entire career, everything she had worked for, was now at risk. "I'm sorry, Olivia," her boss finally said, his voice soft but firm. "We're going to have to let you go, effective immediately." The words hit Olivia like a physical blow. She tried to protest, to beg, but it was too late. Her perfect world was crumbling around her, and she couldn't stop it. In a matter of minutes, Olivia went from being the untouchable star of her firm to just another disgraced employee. She was escorted out of the building, her name stripped from the prestigious list of employees. Emma's plan had worked. It had taken time, patience, and a great deal of strategy, but it was all falling into place. Olivia, in all her arrogance, had never suspected that she was the target. She had been too focused on herself, too confident in her position, to realize that Emma was quietly pulling the strings. As Olivia stood outside the building, staring up at the company's towering glass walls, she realized too late that nothing was as secure as she had believed. She had been brought down, not by someone she could fight, but by someone she had underestimated. Emma wasn't finished yet, though. This was just the beginning. After the sudden downfall of Olivia's career, Emma could feel a strange satisfaction brewing inside her. Watching Olivia, once so confident and untouchable, now floundering in the aftermath of her own deceit, was like watching a dam break. Everything Olivia had worked so hard to build, everything she had carefully curated over the years, was slipping through her fingers, and Emma had been the one to make it happen. It was a slow burn, but Emma could feel her anger starting to cool. There was no elation in her heart, no feeling of triumph that she had once expected. Instead, there was just an overwhelming sense of justice. Olivia's actions had finally caught up to her, and it was exactly what she deserved. But Emma wasn't done. This was only one battle won. There was a bigger war to fight, one that involved more than just Olivia. Her mother had always been the source of much of her pain. She was the one who stood by as Emma was abused, the one who ignored the signs, the one who allowed Olivia to get away with everything. Emma had spent years trying to earn her mother's love, trying to make her see her worth, but every time she was knocked down, her mother's indifference only grew. Emma finally realized that her mother had never really been on her side. She was just another puppet in Olivia's game. As the days went by, Emma noticed that her mother was growing increasingly agitated. The silence between them, once a normal part of their relationship, had now become uncomfortable. Her mother was no longer the strong, controlling figure she used to be. There was a shift in the house, something Emma couldn't ignore. Olivia's fall from grace had shaken her mother's carefully curated image, and Emma could see the cracks forming. Her mother had always been the one to manipulate the family dynamic, to control what happened behind closed doors. She had been the mastermind behind Olivia's success, pulling strings from the shadows. But now that Olivia's perfect life was in tatters, her mother didn't have the same power she once did. Emma saw it clearly. Her mother was no longer the authority figure she once appeared to be. She was just a broken woman, scrambling to regain control of a situation she couldn't fix. Emma's feelings toward her mother had shifted. For so long, she had yearned for her mother's approval, her love, her validation. But now, as she watched her mother fumble and struggle, she realized that she didn't need it anymore. Her mother had never been in control of her own life, and certainly not Emma's. For the first time, Emma felt a surge of power. She was no longer trapped by her mother's expectations or Olivia's cruelty. She was free. But the freedom wasn't something Emma had expected. There was no dramatic moment of release, no sudden clarity. Instead, it was a quiet realization, a shift in the way she saw herself. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a force of her own making. And she wasn't going to let anyone, least of all her mother, control her again. Emma watched as her mother struggled to hold on to the last shred of control she had over the situation. She tried to smooth things over, to put on her usual act, but it was all falling apart. Olivia's public disgrace had been a blow to her mother's pride, and now she was scrambling, trying to find a way to fix things, but there was nothing she could do. One evening, Emma sat across from her mother at the dinner table. The silence was thick, heavier than it had ever been before. Her mother picked at her food, avoiding Emma's gaze, but Emma didn't care anymore. She had nothing left to say to her. Her mother had never been there for her when she needed her most, and now Emma realized that she had never truly needed her. "You've lost control, haven't you?" Emma said, her voice quiet but firm. Her mother's eyes flickered toward her, but she said nothing. Emma felt a strange calmness wash over her. "You've always tried to control everything, to manipulate the people around you, to make sure Olivia stayed at the top. But now look at her. Look at what's become of her." Her mother didn't respond, but Emma could see the frustration in her eyes. She had always been the one pulling the strings, but now those strings were unraveling. Emma wasn't going to be the one she controlled anymore. "I'm not your puppet," Emma said softly. "I'm done being controlled by you and Olivia. I've been walking on eggshells for years, but I'm done. You don't get to control me anymore." Her mother's face twisted in disbelief, but Emma didn't back down. She had finally found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence it again. For the first time, Emma realized that she had been the one holding the power all along. Her mother and Olivia had tried to break her, to turn her into someone she wasn't. But they had failed. Emma had become stronger, not because of them, but in spite of them. And now the tables had turned. She was no longer the one at their mercy. They were the ones who had to answer to her. Emma had already shattered Olivia's career, but that wasn't enough. She knew there was more to the story, more layers of deceit and manipulation to expose. It wasn't just Olivia she needed to take down, it was her mother too. Her mother had been the mastermind behind it all, pulling the strings, keeping everyone in line with her charm and power. But now Emma was about to expose all of it. Her mother's connections, the relationships she had cultivated over the years with influential people, were the cornerstone of Olivia's success. Emma realized that these relationships were just as fragile as Olivia's career. They had been built on lies, on manipulation, and Emma knew that it was time to make them crumble. She started digging into her mother's connections, reaching out to people who had worked with her in the past. The more Emma uncovered, the clearer it became. Her mother had used her position to secure deals for Olivia, to make sure she was always one step ahead of everyone else, and she had done it at the expense of everyone around her. Emma began to send anonymous tips to the people who had helped her mother and Olivia. She knew these people had their own secrets, their own skeletons in the closet, and she made sure they knew that she had the power to expose them. Each tip was calculated, each word carefully chosen to sow doubt and fear. It didn't take long before the walls started to close in. One by one, the people who had helped her mother began to pull away. Business partners who had once praised her mother were now distancing themselves. Invitations to exclusive events stopped coming. Deals that had seemed set in stone began to unravel. The powerful network that had once shielded Emma's family was now crumbling, and there was nothing her mother could do to stop it. Emma's plan was working perfectly, and she could feel the momentum building. Olivia's fall from grace had been just the beginning. She had no idea that Emma had been working behind the scenes, exposing everything her mother had worked so hard to protect. The truth was being unveiled, and Emma was at the centre of it all, watching as the life that had been so carefully built around lies began to fall apart. Then came the breaking point. Her mother, once so proud and confident, was now facing public backlash. Rumours started circulating, stories about her manipulation, about the deals she had made with shady business figures. People began questioning her integrity, and soon the community that had once admired her turned their backs. The family's carefully cultivated image of respectability was shattered in an instant. Emma knew it was only a matter of time before the fallout would be impossible to ignore. She had turned the tables completely. Her mother, who had once been the puppet master, was now the one being controlled by the very people she had used. No one wanted to be associated with her anymore. Her reputation was in ruins, and she had no one left to protect her. Olivia, meanwhile, was dealing with the consequences of her own actions. Her career was over, but now the public had begun to see the true extent of her behaviour. The whispers, the rumours, they were all catching up with her. People who had once adored her, who had supported her career, were now turning on her. Brands dropped her, former colleagues distanced themselves, and the social circles she had once been a part of closed in on her. It wasn't just her career that was at risk, it was her entire identity. Olivia had always built her self-worth on her status, her image, her ability to control how others saw her. But now, as Emma's plan unfolded, Olivia was losing everything. Her reputation was in tatters, and she had no idea how to rebuild it. For the first time in her life, Olivia was powerless. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She wasn't untouchable. She was just another person, exposed for all the things she had tried so hard to hide. Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as she watched it unfold. Olivia had spent her whole life making Emma feel small, making her feel like nothing. But now Emma was the one in control. As for Emma's mother, she had nowhere to turn. The same people who had once admired her now avoided her, and the walls she had so carefully built around herself were falling apart. For the first time in her life, Emma's mother was facing the consequences of her actions, and this time there was no one to protect her. Emma stood outside their world, watching as it crumbled. She had spent so many years trying to fit into that world, trying to be the daughter her mother wanted, the sister Olivia wanted. But now she realised she didn't need them. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need to be part of their game. She had fought for her own freedom, for her own place in the world, and in doing so she had become stronger than either of them ever realised. The punishment had only just begun, but Emma was already victorious. She had destroyed the lies, shattered the masks they had worn for so long, and shown them that she was no longer the one to be ignored. Now it was their turn to face the truth. Emma had spent months preparing for this moment. She had meticulously collected every piece of evidence, every message, every voicemail, every photograph. She had worked in the shadows, building her case, gathering the tools she needed to expose her family for what they truly were. Now it was time to reveal the truth. It wasn't enough for Emma to quietly dismantle her family's reputation. She wanted the world to see what they had done to her. She wanted to make sure that Olivia and her mother would never again be able to hide behind their perfect facade. She had arranged a public interview with a journalist who was known for exposing hidden truths. It was a calculated move. Emma knew that the only way to make an impact, to ensure the world took notice, was to make sure it was all out in the open. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about setting the record straight, showing people that the picture-perfect family they had once portrayed was nothing more than a lie. The day of the interview, Emma felt a strange mixture of anticipation and calm. She had spent countless nights rehearsing, refining her words, preparing for every possible question. But as she sat in the studio, waiting for the cameras to roll, Emma began to feel a sense of unease. This was it, the moment when her story would finally be told, when the truth would be exposed to the world. But still, a part of her hesitated. She was about to reveal her darkest secrets, the ones she had buried for so long. Could she really go through with it? As the journalist introduced her and the cameras started rolling, Emma forced herself to take a deep breath. She had worked too hard for this. She couldn't back down now. The interview began, and Emma told her story. She spoke about the years of emotional and physical abuse, about the way her mother had always stood by Olivia's side, even when Olivia hurt her. She talked about the burn, the bruises, the humiliation. She told the world how her family had twisted everything to make her feel like she was the one at fault, how they had never once cared enough to protect her. And all the while she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. It wasn't the telling of the story that was hard. It was the fact that it was finally out there. There was no turning back now. But as she spoke, Emma began to feel a sense of release, as if every word she uttered was peeling away the layers of pain that had built up inside her for so long. What struck her most, however, was the silence from her mother and Olivia. They were both sitting in the room, just out of view of the cameras, but Emma could feel their presence. Her mother, once so powerful, so in control, was now silent, her face hidden from the public eye. Olivia, who had spent so many years commanding attention, was now slumped in her chair, barely looking up. It was in that silence that the gravity of Emma's words sank in. Her mother and Olivia weren't just refusing to speak, they were refusing to acknowledge what had happened. They weren't defending themselves, they weren't denying Emma's claims. They were simply silent. And in that silence, Emma realized that their indifference was their guilt. They couldn't even pretend to care anymore. They had nothing left to say because they knew Emma was right. They knew that everything she said was the truth. It was a chilling moment, one that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. As she looked out at the audience, she could feel their eyes on her, their judgment. She had expected to feel vindicated, to feel a sense of triumph, but what she felt instead was a strange sense of emptiness. The truth was out there now, and nothing would ever be the same. But somehow, it didn't feel like enough. The journalist asked Emma about her mother's role in all of this, and Emma didn't hesitate. She explained how her mother had used her power to control Olivia's life, how she had manipulated situations to keep Olivia at the top, while Emma was left to fend for herself. She told the world how her mother had never once defended her, how she had always put Olivia's needs above her own. And as Emma spoke, she watched her mother's face, a face that had once been filled with pride and confidence, now slowly crumble. The final blow came when Emma revealed the most damning piece of evidence, a recording of her mother laughing about Emma's struggles, mocking her for being too sensitive and too weak. The words rang out in the quiet studio, and Emma felt her heart race as she saw her mother's face drain of colour. There was no denying it now. The world would hear everything. There was nowhere to hide. As the interview concluded, Emma was left with a strange sense of finality. She had done it. She had exposed the truth. But the weight of it all settled over her. She had spent so many years fighting for her place in the family, fighting to be seen, to be heard. But now, everything had changed. Olivia's career was over, her mother's reputation shattered, and Emma had finally broken free from their control. The silence in the studio was deafening, the weight of Emma's words hanging in the air. Her mother and Olivia had no choice but to face the consequences of their actions. There was no more pretending, no more hiding. The truth had finally been set free. Emma didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She had done what needed to be done, and now she was free. The fallout from the interview was swift and undeniable. Emma had known that exposing the truth would stir things up, but she hadn't fully anticipated the tidal wave of attention it would garner. The video of the interview, along with the shocking evidence she had revealed, spread like wildfire across social media. The photos, the audio clips, the video footage, they all told the same brutal story. Emma had been a victim of years of manipulation, emotional abuse, and neglect at the hands of the people who were supposed to love and protect her. The images were damning. There was one of her as a child, bruised and tear-streaked, her small face twisted in pain, the burn mark on her back clearly visible. Another showed her as a teenager, hunched over in a corner, her body crumpled from yet another beating. And there was the video, a recording of a conversation between her mother and Olivia, laughing as they mocked Emma's pain, dismissing her struggles as nothing more than drama. The recordings spoke louder than words ever could. There was no denying the truth in those images, no denying the cruelty that had been inflicted upon her. As the footage and photographs spread, the reactions were swift and unforgiving. People who had once admired Olivia's polished image, who had seen her as a beacon of success, now turned their backs on her. Colleagues in the PR world, who had once praised her for her professionalism, distanced themselves. Brands who had worked with Olivia severed their ties with her. What had once been a spotless reputation was now tarnished beyond repair. And then there was Emma's mother. Her carefully constructed public image as a doting, supportive mother, the woman who had always been at the centre of her community's respect, crumbled. The community she had once commanded with authority now turned their gaze away from her. Donations to her charity dried up. Invitations to prestigious events were rescinded. No one wanted to be associated with someone who had been exposed as a manipulator, someone who had allowed her own daughter to suffer in silence. As the backlash continued to grow, Emma felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. She had always hoped that one day people would see what she had endured, that someone would acknowledge the pain she had carried for so long. But now that it was all out in the open, now that the world knew the truth, Emma realized that it wasn't the world's approval she had been seeking all these years. It was freedom, and she had it now. The hardest part, though, was watching her mother unravel. Emma had expected anger, bitterness, maybe even a denial of the truth. But instead she saw her mother retreat into herself, unable to cope with the fallout of her own actions. It wasn't just the loss of her status or her influence, it was the realization that she had lost Emma, her own daughter, for good. And that loss was far more devastating than any scandal could ever be. For Emma, this was the moment of liberation. She had not only reclaimed her voice, but had also shattered the illusion that her mother and Olivia had so carefully crafted. The world was seeing them for who they truly were, and Emma was finally free from their control. But the repercussions for Olivia and her mother didn't end with public shame. Their personal lives were shattered as well. Olivia, once at the pinnacle of her career, found herself jobless, unemployable in a field that once adored her. The media coverage of her disgrace followed her wherever she went. She couldn't hide from the truth, and the shame of being exposed as a fraud haunted her at every turn. The friends and colleagues who had once admired her success now whispered behind her back, knowing the truth about the woman they had supported. As for Emma's mother, she found herself without a single ally. People who had once adored her, who had seen her as the epitome of success, now distanced themselves. She had spent years playing the role of the perfect mother, the perfect community leader, but all of it had been built on a foundation of lies. And now the truth had shattered that illusion, leaving her isolated and alone. The most profound moment of all, though, came when Emma saw her mother in public for the first time after the scandal broke. Her mother was walking through a crowded shopping mall, her head down, trying to avoid the stares and whispers. The people who had once bowed to her, who had once supported her every move, now avoided her gaze. Emma watched from a distance, a strange feeling of finality settling over her. For years, Emma had been desperate to gain her mother's approval, to earn her love and acceptance. But now she realized that the only thing she had ever needed was her own approval. She no longer needed to seek validation from someone who had never cared about her. She had found the strength to stand on her own. As Emma watched her mother walk away, she couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The truth had been revealed, and both her mother and Olivia had to face the consequences of their actions. But Emma was free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the years of abuse. And as she walked away from the scene, she felt lighter than she had ever felt before. The aftermath of Emma's victory had left her both liberated and lost. The years of abuse, the manipulation, and the torment she had suffered at the hands of her own family were finally exposed to the world. Olivia's career was ruined, her mother's carefully crafted persona shattered, and Emma had successfully freed herself from the clutches of a family that had never cared about her. But as the dust settled and the world moved on, Emma realized that the victory, though sweet, wasn't enough. For so long, her life had been defined by survival. She had fought, endured, and resisted the urge to break, to give in to the pain. But now that the battle was won, Emma found herself asking a question she had never dared to ask before. What now? The answer came to her in a quiet, unexpected moment. She sat in her small apartment one evening, looking at the piles of paperwork, the photographs, the recordings, proof of everything that had happened. She thought about the pain she had endured and how it had shaped her. But then she thought about all the others who were still trapped in the same cycle, still suffering in silence. She realized that the fight she had waged was not just about her, it was about every person who had ever been made to feel small, helpless, and invisible. It was about creating a space for them to finally speak, to be seen, and to heal. Emma decided that her fight wasn't over. She didn't just want to survive, she wanted to make a difference. She wanted to take her pain and turn it into something meaningful, something that could help others like her. And so she began to build something from the ashes of her past, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence, specifically those who had suffered at the hands of family members. It wasn't easy. There were countless obstacles, legal red tape, and moments of doubt. Emma had no experience running an organization, and she often questioned whether she was truly equipped to handle it. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the faces of the people she had helped through her own journey, the people who had offered her strength when she had none left. She remembered Rachel, who had stood by her through it all, who had believed in her when no one else did. The organization, which Emma named the Burnback, quickly gained momentum. She focused on providing not just a voice for the survivors, but tangible resources to help them rebuild their lives. Therapy services, legal assistance, housing support. The Burnback offered it all. Emma used her own experience to create programs that addressed the unique needs of those who had been hurt by family members, those who had suffered in the silence of their homes, who had been told that they were too sensitive or too weak. As the months went by, Emma saw the impact of her work. Victims who had once felt powerless began to find their voice. Survivors who had been stuck in toxic family dynamics were able to break free and start fresh. Emma was helping people find not just safety, but hope. She was showing them that they didn't have to be defined by the abuse they had endured, that they could rise from the ashes just as she had. But even as she found strength in helping others, Emma struggled with the ghosts of her own past. She could give people the tools they needed to heal, but she couldn't erase the scars that had shaped her. She still found herself haunted by memories of her mother's cold indifference, by the way Olivia had used her as a stepping stone. But the more Emma helped others, the more she realized that healing wasn't just a destination, it was a journey. And she didn't have to walk it alone. As the Burnback grew, Emma found herself surrounded by a community of survivors, advocates, and supporters. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She wasn't someone defined by the things that had happened to her. She was a person with agency, with power, with purpose. In the early days of the burn back, Emma received a letter from a young woman who had just escaped a dangerous home. The letter was simple but powerful. It read, "I didn't think I could survive, but then I heard about your story. You gave me hope. I don't know if I can ever fully heal, but now I know I'm not alone." Emma read that letter over and over again, tears streaming down her face. It was in moments like these that Emma realized the true power of her journey. Her pain had become a source of strength for others. In the years that followed, Emma continued to lead the burn back with unwavering dedication. She worked tirelessly to expand its reach, to provide more resources, and to offer survivors the support they needed to rebuild their lives. But she never forgot where she had come from. Every time she helped someone, every time she saw a survivor find their strength, Emma was reminded of her own journey, of how far she had come from the girl who had been trapped in a family that didn't care about her. She had not only survived the abuse, she had transformed it. She had taken her pain, her suffering, and turned it into a force for good. And in doing so, she had created a legacy that would outlast everything Olivia and her mother had ever done to her. Emma was no longer the broken girl in the corner. She was the woman who had fought for herself and for others, and had found the strength to rise above it all. And in doing so, she had changed the lives of countless others who had been broken like her. The journey wasn't easy, but it had been worth it. And now, as Emma looked around at the people she had helped, at the survivors who had found hope because of her work, she knew that the pain she had once endured had led her to something far greater than she could have ever imagined. She was not just surviving, she was thriving. With every passing day, Emma felt the weight of her transformation. She wasn't just the woman who had survived her family's cruelty. She was the woman who had created something greater than herself, something that would help others who had once been in her position. The Burnback wasn't just an organisation, it was her lifeline, a bridge from the dark past to the bright future she was building, not only for herself, but for others as well. The organisation had started small, just an idea born out of the pain Emma had endured. She'd wanted to create something real, something that would give people who had been hurt by family the chance to heal and rebuild. At first it was just a couple of people, volunteers and supporters who believed in Emma's vision. But as word spread, so did the reach of the Burnback. Emma had started by focusing on the one thing that had helped her the most: connection. She wanted to create a network where survivors of familial abuse could find support, without judgment, without fear of being dismissed. For the first time in her life, she found herself surrounded by people who understood her, not just the words, but the pain. She wasn't the only one who had suffered at the hands of a family member, and she wasn't the only one who had felt lost and abandoned. It was a revelation that, while heartbreaking, also gave Emma the strength to push forward. She was no longer alone in her fight. The people who had suffered alongside her were now standing beside her in the same mission. As the Burnback grew, so did Emma's understanding of what true strength was. She had never seen herself as a leader. She had never imagined that one day people would look up to her, see her as a symbol of hope. But here she was, standing at the helm of a movement, guiding others through the same storm she had weathered. It wasn't easy, nothing worth doing ever was. There were days when Emma doubted herself, when the pain of her past still haunted her, but every time she felt weak, she would remember why she started the Burnback in the first place. She had to keep going, not just for herself, but for the people who had no one to turn to. She started to speak at public events, raising awareness about domestic abuse and the unique struggles faced by those who had been abused by their families. Emma's story became a beacon for others, showing them that they could overcome even the darkest of circumstances. She didn't sugarcoat her experiences. She didn't try to paint herself as a flawless hero. She was real, and that made her powerful. Her authenticity drew people to her, made them believe that they could rise above their own struggles too. As the burn back expanded, Emma was able to offer more resources, more help. She collaborated with shelters, therapy centres, legal advocates, anyone who could provide the necessary support for those who had been emotionally, physically, or mentally scarred by their families. She worked tirelessly to build a network of professionals who could provide counselling and guidance. She knew that the road to healing wasn't just about giving people a place to stay or providing them with food. It was about offering a pathway to healing, helping them rebuild their confidence and reclaim their lives. The more Emma witnessed the transformation of the people who came through the burn back, the more she realised how much her own life had changed. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She wasn't merely picking up the pieces of her broken past. Emma was creating a new future, not just for herself, but for an entire community of people who had been silenced for far too long. She was changing lives, one person at a time. And in doing so, she had completely transformed her own life. One day, while speaking at a fundraising event, Emma was approached by a young woman who had been through the program. The woman, now in her 20s, looked up at Emma with gratitude in her eyes. "I never thought I could be happy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But because of the burn back, I've been able to leave my abusive family. I've started therapy and I'm going to college. You saved my life." In that moment, Emma realised that this was what she had been working toward all along. This was what it meant to break the cycle of abuse. This was what it meant to not only survive, but to thrive. Emma had become not just a survivor, but a saviour in her own right. She had given others the tools to escape the same cycle she had once been trapped in. She had given them hope. The burn back had become more than just a charity. It was a movement. It wasn't just Emma who was changing lives. It was an entire community of people, each one carrying their own story, their own strength. They were united by their shared experiences, by the knowledge that they had been broken but were no longer powerless. Emma knew that the journey was far from over. There would always be more work to do, more people to help. The wounds of the past didn't disappear just because the truth had come out. But Emma had found peace in her purpose. She had built something meaningful out of the ashes of her own pain. She had become the change she once wished she could see in the world. As she stood there, looking out at the people she had helped, at the faces that had once been filled with fear but were now full of hope, Emma couldn't help but smile. She had found her purpose. She had found her place in the world. And in the process, she had become something she never thought possible, a force for good, a true change-maker. Emma wasn't just living anymore. She was thriving, and through her work, she was making sure that others could too. As Emma stood in the quiet of her office, gazing out over the city skyline, she felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. It had been a long journey, a journey from darkness into light, from being the silenced victim to becoming the woman who held her future in her own hands. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments when she doubted herself, when the weight of the past seemed unbearable. But as she looked around at the bustling world she had helped create, the world that had been shaped by her determination and her refusal to be broken, Emma knew one thing for certain. She had won. She wasn't just looking at the city through the window, she was looking at a reflection of her own transformation. There was a time when she would have seen this view as distant, something she could only dream of, but now it was hers to command. It wasn't just the freedom from her family's cruelty. It was the freedom to define her own life, to live according to her own values, to decide who she was and what she wanted to become. The burn back had become more than just an organisation. It had become Emma's legacy. Every day she met people who had been where she was, trapped, isolated, powerless, and helped them find their own strength, their own path forward. And as the organisation continued to grow, so did Emma. She had once been defined by the abuse, by the neglect, by the lies. But now she was defined by her actions, her resilience, and her ability to make a difference in the lives of others. But as she stood there reflecting on all she had accomplished, Emma couldn't help but feel a deep, unexpected sense of gratitude. It wasn't the satisfaction of revenge that filled her heart. It was the understanding that everything she had done, every step she had taken, had been about more than getting back at her family. The truth she had exposed, the public shaming, the dismantling of her family's image, it wasn't about making Olivia and her mother suffer. It was about her own liberation. It was about finding herself, reclaiming her power, and ultimately realizing that she had never needed them to define her. The process of revenge had opened her eyes to a deeper truth. She had been fighting to find herself all along. For so many years, Emma had been stuck in a cycle of trying to gain approval, trying to be seen, trying to fit into a family that rejected her. But once the revenge had played out, once her family had been exposed for who they truly were, Emma had found something she hadn't expected: peace. She had spent so long holding on to her anger, to her resentment, to the need for justice. And while those things had driven her, they had also weighed heavily on her heart. Revenge, she realized, had not been the end of her healing. It had been the beginning. The more she helped others, the more she realized that her true victory was not in the destruction of her family, but in the rebuilding of herself. Her healing had been about letting go of the need to punish those who had wronged her and focusing on creating a life she could be proud of. She thought back to the day she had left her mother's house for the last time, the day she had walked away from the family who had hurt her. At that moment, Emma had thought she was leaving behind the source of her pain. But in truth, she had been leaving behind the person she had once been, the person defined by her suffering, by her desire for approval, by her need for revenge, the person who had been trapped in the cycle of violence and neglect, that Emma no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had chosen to rise, who had chosen to take control of her own destiny. A woman who had found strength not in seeking retribution, but in helping others break free from the same cycle she had been caught in. Emma realized now that her journey hadn't been about breaking others down. It had been about building herself up. She had become a symbol of what was possible when you refused to let your past define your future. And as she reflected on her journey, Emma knew that she would never be the same. She had learned that real strength came not from defeating others, but from learning to forgive herself. She had been a victim, but she had fought to be more than that. She had fought to become a survivor, a warrior, and ultimately a healer. And in that process, she had found the freedom she had longed for her entire life. The road ahead wasn't easy, and Emma knew that there would always be challenges. There would always be more people to help, more battles to fight, but she was ready. She had already proven to herself that she was capable of overcoming anything. And now, as she stood there looking out over the city she had come to love, Emma knew that her work wasn't done. It had just begun. Emma wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a leader. She was a force for change. And she had created a future for herself that was not defined by the past, but by the strength she had found within herself. Emma stood in front of the window, the soft glow of the evening sun casting long shadows across the room. The city buzzed below her, but in this moment it felt like a distant hum, insignificant compared to the quiet peace she had found within herself. It had been a long, winding road filled with pain, anger, and the unrelenting quest for justice. But now, as she looked out over the skyline, Emma felt a deep sense of calm. For the first time in years, she was no longer looking over her shoulder, no longer haunted by the ghosts of her past. She had been through hell, but now she was free, free from the lies, free from the manipulation, free from the need for approval or revenge. Emma had fought to escape the hold her family had on her, and she had succeeded, not through force, but through resilience and self-discovery. The pain that had once defined her was no longer the driving force in her life. She had reclaimed her power, not by destroying her enemies, but by understanding that true strength came from within. Her mother and Olivia, those who had once held so much power over her, were now nothing more than faded shadows in the periphery of her life. They had been exposed for who they truly were. Their carefully crafted lives dismantled by the very person they had underestimated. Emma no longer needed to confront them or seek their validation. The world had already turned its back on them, and she had no intention of looking back. Her mother, once the queen of their small, insular world, had lost everything. The people who had once admired her now whispered behind her back. Their respect turned to disdain. Olivia, who had so arrogantly believed that her success was unassailable, had watched her career crumble. The public had turned against them, and no amount of apologies or false promises could restore what they had lost. They were no longer the people who could control their world. They were now pariahs, cast aside by the very society they had once ruled. Emma's heart no longer carried the weight of anger she had once thought necessary for justice. She had done what needed to be done, exposed the truth, and ensured that her abusers faced the consequences of their actions. But in the process, something unexpected had happened. Emma had found peace. She no longer needed to hold on to her hatred for her mother or Olivia. She realized that forgiveness wasn't for them, it was for her. Forgiveness meant freeing herself from the chains of resentment, from the constant cycle of needing to get back at those who had wronged her. As Emma stood there, looking out over the horizon, she understood that her journey had never been about revenge. It had been about reclaiming her own life, about freeing herself from the emotional prison she had been locked in for so long. She had spent years trying to fit into a mould that didn't fit her, trying to earn the love and approval of a family that had never truly seen her. But now she was free to be the person she had always wanted to be, strong, independent, and unapologetically herself. The journey hadn't been easy. It had taken time, patience, and a great deal of courage, but Emma had found the one thing she had longed for: freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes from revenge or from seeing others suffer, but the freedom that comes from letting go of the past, from no longer being defined by the actions of others. Her mother and Olivia had been so focused on their own desires, on maintaining their false image, that they had never seen Emma for who she truly was. And now, as they tried to rebuild their shattered lives, Emma realized that they were incapable of ever understanding the depth of her transformation. They would never know what it was like to truly be free. Emma had let go of the need for revenge because she understood something now. The true victory was not in their downfall, but in her own rise. She had reclaimed her life, her power, and her peace. She was no longer held hostage by the past or by the people who had once tried to define her. As she walked away from the window, she knew that she was ready to face whatever came next. She had built something meaningful, something lasting. The burnback was flourishing, and with it, Emma had created a legacy that would continue to change lives. She had taken the pain of her past and used it to light the way for others. And now she could walk forward without looking back. In the quiet of her apartment, Emma realized that she was no longer the broken girl who had once yearned for approval. She had become the woman she had always dreamed of, strong, independent, and free. And that freedom, the freedom to be herself, was something no one could ever take away from her. For the first time in years, Emma was at peace with who she was. She had found her place in the world, not as the victim of her past, but as the author of her future. The world, it seemed, was now hers to shape.